It's a sleepy Sunday morning in Colorado Springs. At the Amarillo Motel on the city's west side, all is calm and quiet.
It's not a bad part of town at all. As a matter of fact, it's really kind of a pretty old part of town. It provided a place to live for people who had a very limited income.
Shortly after 10 a.m., a motel custodian begins wheeling a cart full of clean linen from room to room.
Housekeeping, towels.
But when he gets to room 125, he notices something strange.
He opened the door, kind of looked inside.
Hey, buddy.
The staff there looked in on him and, he was propped up against a couch. They thought that he'd been drinking and was just passed out.
The custodian moves in for a closer look and makes a shocking discovery.
Discovered that he was dead as a doornail. There was blood everywhere.
He flees the room and immediately calls 911. Across town, Lt.Joe Kenda is getting in a morning jog when his pager lights up. It's from dispatch.
When that rings in my line of work, the rest of my world stops. I have to go to work. The West Side was the first neighborhood that existed in Colorado Springs. So you have a low level of criminal activity that's fairly constant, but it's not very serious.
But as soon as Kenda rolls up to the Amarillo Motel and steps into room 125, he knows the crime scene is as serious as it gets.
Where's the money? Hey, where's the money? Give me your money.
There's obvious signs of a struggle. Furniture's knocked over. There is blood everywhere. And our victim is soaked in blood. He has been multiply stabbed in the chest.
Do we know who he is?
Yeah, the Dick's name is Eric Houston.
Eric only lived there for 2 weeks. He had just moved into that motel.
It looks like a possible robbery. Something's missing.
As we continue to look around, we see broken stereo wires where something has been pulled away. So we have theft of probably some type of electronics. There's a bottle of vodka sitting on the table that's still standing there. The cap is off. There's some of it missing.
After sending the vodka off to be fingerprinted, Kenda orders the body to be bagged and tagged. He then turns his attention to the blood evidence, which in this case speaks volumes.
In some knife cases where a person's stabbed multiple times, and as the arm is swinging back or away, there's cast off of the blood from the knife.
In addition, Kenda notices a series of perfectly round red droplets throughout the room.
We find a great deal of blood evidence in this place that's gravity bleeding. And what I mean by that is blood dropping from a wound. And it's in the sink, and it's close to the body of the victim.
The gravity bleeding provides Kenda with some telling information about the crime and the killer.
Whoever did this got cut.
If you're fighting with somebody struggling and you're using a knife as a weapon, and should that knife become blood covered and your hand become blood covered, obviously it's going to act as a lubricant.
The stabber's hand will often slip down the knife, cutting his hand seriously, because he's busy attacking this person with great force. That drop bleeding is coming out of that suspect wound.
What'd you find?
Looks like we've got gravitation bleeding.
While CSIs gather samples of the killer's blood, Kenda has his men start making calls.
I need you to contact all the medical centers. Have them be on the lookout for anyone with any lacerations, especially on their hands.
It is a routine when you discover or you believe that your perpetrator is hurt. You contact all the hospitals, asking all of these places to notify you if someone comes in with this kind of injury.
As the calls go out to local hospitals, Kenda steps out back to survey the exterior of the Amarillo Motel.
This motel has been in business for a great number of years. It's an old building, multi-storied, rooms on both sides.
I talked to the hotel manager.
Yeah, office is just over there.
Kenda knows many of the Amarillo's low-income residents are wary of police.
Do
Yes.
you have a manager on duty?
Yes, we do.
So he starts by questioning the motel's manager.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
How you doing? I'm Detective Kenda. Can you tell me a little bit about Eric Houston?
Sure. He was one of our tenants here.
Is he the only one registered at the room?
Just him.
As far as the manager of the motel was concerned, Eric was a model tenant.
Was he close to anyone here or have any friends?
I believe he was close with a guy named Jimmy McDonald.
Can you take us to his room?
Of course. Here we are.
All right, we'll take it from here. Thank you. How you doing? You Jimmy?
Yes, I am.
I'm Detective Kenda. Are you friends with Eric Houston?
Eric, yeah.
Jimmy works with Eric, and they seem to be pretty good friends.
Sorry, I have some bad news for you. Eric was murdered last night.
He's very upset about the fact that his friend is dead.
Is it possible I come inside and talk to you about it for a minute?
Fighting back tears, Jimmy invites Lieutenant Kenda into his room.
Why don't you run outside and see if the uniforms found anything?
Yeah, sure thing.
Can you tell me how you knew Eric?
We work together.
We work at Goodwill Industries. So what do you know about Eric?
He was a good guy. Came from a good, loving home.
Jimmy explains that while Eric grew up in a loving family, tragedy struck at an early age.
His brother and he were sent by his mom to a local grocery store. On the way there, he was hit by a car.
Eric suffered injuries that put him in the hospital for weeks.
He had severe head injuries, which resulted in him having a limited mental capacity.
Unable to focus in school and unable to hold down steady work, Eric found himself living on the street as an adult. As he learned to cope with his disability, Eric's luck began to improve.
Eric was very outgoing and friendly and actually a very pleasant person to have around. He was one of those people that got along with everybody.
Eventually, Eric landed a job with Goodwill Industries polishing floors. The gainful employment and steady paycheck further bolstered his confidence.
Everybody said that he was someone who was very dependable, would come to work early.
Jimmy McDonald tells Kenda it was at Goodwill where he and Eric became close friends. But not everyone had Eric's best interests at heart.
People took advantage of him because of his handicap.
Eric, because of his mental capabilities at the time, did not make some of the greatest choices in the people he associated with.
Every payday, he would go to the liquor store and buy liquor, and he would bring it back and share it with everybody. Everybody that lived here, he would share it with.
It don't matter if he drinking, he gonna get some more. It's all good. It's on him. As long as y'all having fun, that's all that matters.
Can you think of anyone that might have had a problem with him, that might have wanted to hurt him at all?
No, I can't think of anybody.
Well, I appreciate your help. If you can think of anything at all, feel free to give me a call.
Sure.
What do you got?
Looks like the murder weapon.
Where'd they find it?
Officers outside found it in the parking lot.
We find a kitchen knife soaked in blood. We assume this is our weapon.
Once the knife is tagged, Kenda personally delivers it to the coroner.
Doctor, I got a possible murder weapon. I wanted to check it and see if it matched the wounds.
Who quickly ascertains that it is indeed the murder weapon.
Very consistent with the wounds.
But that's not all he discovers.
27 stab wounds, punctured both lungs, heart, liver, spleen.
Eric Stanley Houston was stabbed 27 times in the chest with a very large knife. To see someone blitz attack another person and deliver 27 stab wounds to the central chest, this is someone who's in a frenzy at the time they're doing this. They're absolutely frantic with rage.
What was his time of death?
Between 10 p.m. and midnight.
The coroner's findings suggest Eric was murdered roughly 12 hours before his body was discovered.
Blood alcohol above 0.20.
So he was highly intoxicated?
Oh, yeah.
His blood alcohol is well over 0.2, so he's relatively defenseless during this entire episode.
Anything in his pockets?
When the coroner hands the meager possessions over, one item catches Kenda's eye.
There's a receipt in his pocket from a liquor store that's less than a block from where he lives. It's dated the prior evening at 8:51 p.m. And the receipt says it's a bottle of vodka. That's what's on the table, and he's got a receipt in his pocket that he bought it an hour before he died.
Could Eric Houston's trip to the liquor store hold the key to his murder? In an effort to answer that question, Kenda heads to the store to interview the clerk.
Excuse me, sir.
Hi.
I'm Detective Kenda. Were you working here last night?
Yes, I was.
Do you know if an Eric Houston came in?
Yeah, Eric came in and bought a bottle.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Eric.
The guy does remember because Eric is a regular.
You doing all right?
I am about to go have a couple drinks with some buddies of mine.
That sounds like fun.
Was he by himself?
He was by himself. There was another guy out in the car.
When that clerk tells us he got into a car that someone else was driving, and it's an hour before the time frame of his death, whoever is driving that car is now the focus of our attention. Who is this guy?
Lt.Joe Kenda is on the case, trying to solve the murder of 32-year-old Eric Houston, a young man who was stabbed 27 times in the motel room he called home.
He fought for his life, and it wasn't enough. He was overcome and murdered. It is an evidence of incredible violence that most people never see.
What Kenda can't figure out is who would want to murder a young man like Eric Houston. In speaking with a liquor store clerk, he's learned another crucial bit of information.
Excuse me, sir. Were you working here last night?
Yes, I was.
Hey, how you doing?
He came in the store and he bought the bottle, and I kind of spoke to him.
You doing all right?
Hey, Eric, what's happening? You know, and Eric said, oh, me and my buddy are going to have a few drinks. I watch him walk out, and I see him get in a car, and there's another guy driving, and the car pulled away.
Is that the right time? About 8:50?
Yep, that's about the time.
The clerk's statement places Eric Houston with this mystery man just hours before his death.
Thank you.
And gives Kenda his first solid lead.
So now I have our victim in contact with an individual an hour before the time frame of his murder begins.
Just then, Kenda's radio crackles with more big news, this time from the crime lab.
Go ahead for Kenda.
There are bloodstains of what we believe is from a suspect. They do the blood work, and they determine there are two different blood types. So we're right. Our man is hurt, and our man is the second blood type.
Lab techs have also tested the vodka bottle found at the scene for fingerprints.
Do they match our victim? No, they're not Eric's prints. Now, this is a bottle he's only had for an hour before he dies. So whoever took a drink is most likely the one that killed him.
It's a telling bit of information, but one that doesn't translate to a concrete suspect, at least not yet.
We didn't have the automated fingerprint identification programs and computers that we have now. There was a chance, a remote chance, if you had a fingerprint, you really wanted to do an FBI check.
They have at any given moment 50 million sets of fingerprints. But there are 330 million or so people in this country. So we seem to be missing a few. Like, say, 260 million.
Undaunted, Kenda circles back to the Amarillo Motel, questioning anyone who was there the night before.
You stay here?
Yeah.
You know Eric Houston?
Yeah, I know him.
Simultaneously, he dispatches detectives into the streets of the city's west side.
Can I ask you a couple of questions real quick, please?
Did you know Eric Houston?
Have you ever heard of an Eric Houston? Do you know Eric Houston?
Eric Houston was known to associate with a lot of different people. Some of those people had criminal backgrounds.
He's 32 years old, but mentally he is a kid. And all of these rats that he knows are a who's who of criminals on the west side of Colorado Springs who take advantage of him, and he permits it because he thinks they're his friend. Because of his circumstances, he's unable to assess the sincerity of people and their friendship.
Interviewing Eric's connections to the city's criminal fringe proves daunting.
Anyone in particular I think I should talk to?
No, I can't give you any names.
I think his name was D'Angelo and Big Mike.
The individual we talked to about Eric Houston provided a lot of different plausible explanations for his death, leading us in a lot of different directions.
It's the ultimate nightmare. You've got a Yankee Stadium full of suspects, and everybody's got a story. Everybody. We talked to the friends and neighbors. Well, it was a retaliation over a burglary he was involved in. Oh, no, it wasn't that. He plays his music too loud. No, he drinks too much, and he wouldn't share that whiskey with people. And on and on and on. Motive after motive after motive after suspect after suspect.
With every interview either a dead end or a work of fiction, Kenda decides to pay Eric's friend, Jimmy McDonald, another visit and press him for additional information.
Hey, Jimmy. How you doing?
Detective, how you doing?
Mind if I talk to you for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
We're still working on finding out who killed Eric. Is there anyone you can think of at all that maybe he didn't get along with, or maybe, he was having a fight with, or anyone that he might have mentioned?
Within minutes, he hits pay dirt.
Well, yeah, there's this one guy he was telling me about.
Jimmy McDonald has heard a little bit of a confrontation between a person and our victim in the recent past.
Said they had an argument and the guy got mad and the guy threatened to stab him.
He actually said that he threatened to stab him?
Yeah, that's what Eric told me.
Who's that? Well, it's this guy named Stanley Johnson.
You have an individual saying they're going to stab somebody, and then that individual end up being stabbed to death.
It's the break Kenda has been looking for. He orders his men to dig up dirt on Stanley Johnson. In a matter of hours, they unearth a huge nugget of intel.
We discover that Stanley Johnson is the guy driving the car at the liquor store. It's Stanley's car, and he's behind the wheel. There's bad blood on occasion between he and Eric. Great. This could be our guy. This could truly be our guy.
Thanks to a tip from a man named Jimmy McDonald, Lt.Joe Kenda has set his sights on one Stanley Johnson, the new prime suspect in the brutal stabbing death of 32-year-old Eric Houston.
Jimmy McDonald has heard a little bit of a confrontation between a person he identified as Stanley Johnson and our victim in the recent past.
He said he was really mad at Eric, and he was going to stab him to death.
By having his men pound the pavement, Kenda has determined that Stanley Johnson drives a car identical to the one Eric Houston was seen in just prior to his murder.
So here we are. We've got Stanley. He wants to kill Eric. He says he's going to stab him to death, and he's with him an hour before somebody does stab him to death. Close enough for me. Let's bring Stanley in and see what he's got to say for himself.
Stanley, why don't you tell me how you know Eric Houston?
He immediately says, look, I'm friends with Eric. Sometimes I'm enemies with him. We have words.
We would argue with each other. He threatened me, I threatened him. Nothing really happened.
It's all just talk. I never hurt him. I didn't do this. Deny, deny, deny.
Well, you did drive him to the liquor store the other night?
Yeah, I drove him to the liquor store.
We went over to the liquor store, and I was driving.
What happened?
He went in, he grabbed the bottle.
And so I took him back to his motel, and I dropped him off.
Did you go in the motel?
No.
Where'd you go?
I went to a separate party.
You got people there that'll verify that?
Absolutely.
You were there the whole time?
The whole time.
All right. Give me their names and numbers.
Gives us names, gives us an address, times.
Wanna check on those? Yeah, sure. So if you had nothing to do with this, you won't mind giving us your fingerprints and a blood sample?
Do whatever you gotta do. I had nothing to do with this.
He's consenting to it. He's not resisting it because he said, I didn't do anything. He's not afraid of the police. He's not nervous about the police. He's been in jail before. He knows what that's about. But the fact that we're accusing him of killing his friend, that made him mad.
Left hand, please.
There is the possibility the suspect could be bluffing. So while the fingerprints and blood samples are being analyzed, Kenda turns up the heat on Stanley.
Why don't you tell us what really happened?
I already told you what happened.
We have the evidence. We know that you did it.
This is your chance to tell us why you did it.
I didn't do anything to him.
We're having a wonderful time until my lab man knocks on the door.
All right, what do we got?
Nothing.
What do you mean nothing?
I mean nothing. The blood doesn't match, the prints don't match, nothing.
It's not his prints. It's not his blood either. Oh, crap.
Fingerprints at this point did not match Stanley Johnson's, the ones that were recovered at the scene, and the blood type was actually different than the blood type we found at the scene.
In addition, eyewitness accounts confirm that Stanley Johnson was at a house party at the time of the crime. Kenda has no choice but to release him.
Now at this point, although we have a lot of reasonable suspicion, that's been shot by the fact that we now have physical evidence that is not going to tie him directly to our crime scene. It indicates that somebody else is the actual suspect in the case.
All this work, all this effort, and he's not the guy. Frustration sometimes can overwhelm you in this work. It's like, oh, God, now what? Now who is the guy?
With no other concrete leads, Kenda and his team expand their investigation beyond the city's west side.
We start talking to everybody who's ever known Eric, any name that those people produce. We're checking blood, we're checking fingerprints, we're checking alibis, we're checking stories on all these people. In sum, over a long period of time, we talked to and looked at 42 different individuals who might have been involved in this crime.
Next, please.
In what's become a cattle call of an investigation, each of the 42 individuals is brought into the station and asked to give samples to test against the fingerprints and blood evidence collected at the crime scene.
Next.
None of the fingerprints are a match.
Next.
And the blood work isn't definitive.
Of those 42 people, about 25% of them match the general blood type. But blood examination at that time in the late 1980s was based on antigen levels of human blood. They could put you in a population of, say, 3 million people that would have that blood type and that combination of antigens. 1 of 3 million. Well, what good is that?
But Kenda refuses to give up. And while questioning yet another friend of Eric's on the street, a familiar name resurfaces.
Anyone in particular?
You know anything about Arthur?
What's Arthur's last name?
Anaya, I think.
One of the people we're talking to says, what about Arthur Anaya?
They actually had Arthur Anaya's name very early on from some informants who were unwilling to come forward, said they'd heard some street talk.
Arthur Anaya is a name Kenda and his men know all too well.
Arthur Anaya had a extensive criminal history with the police department and other agencies, to include some crimes of violence, property crimes, and other things like that.
If you ranked people as bad people, he'd be right at the top of the list. Arthur Anaya is a Hispanic male, hard as nails. A criminal record measured in pounds rather than pages.
And according to Kenda's newest source, Arthur Anaya has had drinks in Eric Houston's motel room on more than one occasion.
So we get his parole officer to round up Arthur and bring him in.
Arthur, what do you know about Eric Houston's murder?
Who's Eric Houston?
When we first begin,
Don't know the guy.
he not only doesn't know who Eric is, he's not even sure his name is Arthur Anaya.
Let me explain something to you. You can either help him, or you can leave right now from here and go straight back to the penitentiary.
When his parole officer gets in his face, then, well, okay, I do know Eric.
I don't know who killed him. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you anyways.
So this conversation goes absolutely nowhere.
Given Arthur Anaya's criminal record, Kenda has enough probable cause to collect fingerprint and blood samples. But the results are inconclusive.
All we could say is his blood type was consistent or similar to the type of the potential suspect.
His fingerprints don't match to the prints on the bottle. And we have nothing. We have no one saying he said this, he did that. We just have him knowing Eric. So we let him go.
With no other leads, the case once again grows cold.
When cases start to go cold, people on the street lose interest in Eric. The street goes quiet. Nobody has any more opinions to offer. Nobody wants to finger anybody.
Days turn into weeks, then into months. Years pass, and Kenda is no closer to solving the case than the day Eric Houston died.
These kinds of cases would eat at me, just eat at me.
The case went cold for quite a period of time. You really want that one lead or that break in a case.
I would sit in my office and talk to him like he could hear me. You know, Eric, I'm doing everything I can here. We're not giving up. We're not going away. We're not ever going to give up.
Finally, on a warm September morning 4 years later, Kenda receives a tip, one that instantly brings this cold case to a roiling boil.
What is it?
One of my detectives comes in and says, hey, I just got off the phone with the Colorado State Patrol.
State police just picked up a hitchhiker. He says he's the guy who killed Eric Houston.
Really?
I bolted out of my chair.
Tell him we're going to send someone to come pick him up as soon as possible.
Yes, sir.
Boy, could this be a gift from heaven? Yeah, it could be a gift from heaven. Let's see.
For nearly 4 years, Lt.Joe Kenda has been trying to track down Eric Houston's killer. But after investigating more than 50 possible suspects, there have been no arrests, and the investigation is at a standstill.
This happened in an area for which I am responsible. I'm going to find who did this to you if it's at all humanly possible, no matter how long it takes. But I wasn't smarter than anybody else. I was just more stubborn.
Eventually, that stubbornness pays off.
What is it?
State troopers bringing in a guy that says he confessed to Eric Houston's murder to him.
What's going on, buddy?
Just trying to catch a ride.
Can't be out here hitchhiking, right?
According to the state trooper, he'd recently stopped a hitchhiker on the side of the road. Upon questioning him, the drifter made a startling confession.
I gotta get out of town.
Why's that?
I killed a man.
The kid says, I have to get out of town. Why do you have to do that? Well, I murdered a guy named Eric Houston. You what?
Get him back on the phone and tell him we're going to send someone down to pick him up as soon as possible.
Go get this guy and bring him in here.
We are trying to ascertain whether or not he was actually a suspect. It's fairly unusual to have such quick, no motivation confession fall out of the sky.
You ain't got nothing on you, do you?
No, sir.
The drifter is identified as one Mark Banks. Kenda and Detective Brian Ritz sit down to interview him.
It's Mark, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm introduced to Mark Anthony Banks. He is a male in his late 20s, pleasant enough guy.
Sorry, so sorry.
He's very repentant, wants me to know that. He's very sorry for what he's done, but he's here because he can't live with his guilt any longer, and he wants to tell us about this crime.
We met at the Plasma Center downtown.
People who are down on their luck donate their blood for money. It's a very common thing among street people that they meet their friends at the Plasma Center.
We basically hit it off.
Mark states that he and Eric became fast friends, often hanging out at Eric's place, room 125 of the Amarillo Motel.
That's where he stayed. That was our place. We would drink there all the time.
He goes on to say that he went there that night, the night of the murder. We're going to have a drink with Eric. He said they got in an argument over the liquor they were drinking. He found a knife in there, and he killed Eric with it, stabbing him many times.
Mark Banks seems willing, even eager to answer all of Kenda's questions. But Kenda senses something's not quite right.
He is repeating information that was routinely reported in the press for an extended period of time. Does he know this because he was there, or does he know this because he reads the paper and watches TV?
When we're interviewing Mark Banks, obviously what we want to do is find out what he knows that's more than what the common person would have read in the paper. We want him to be able to tie the scene together completely, so we're confident that he was there.
So I ask him a critical question.
Did you hurt yourself at all while this was going on?
What do you mean?
What I'm saying is, did you maybe cut your hand on the knife or hurt yourself some other way?
The fact that Eric's killer suffered a deep wound at the crime scene was never revealed to the press. Kenda and Ritz are anxious to hear Mark's response.
He was the only thing that got stabbed.
And he immediately says, I wasn't hurt. And you just feel the air go out of your lungs. It's like, no, I guess you weren't, Mark, because you weren't even there.
All right, we're gonna have a tech come in and take your fingerprints.
Sure.
Ultimately, Mark's fingerprint and blood type aren't a match for the samples collected from the crime scene. So why would someone confess to a murder they didn't commit?
We do some background on him. We discover he has a mental health history that is extensive. We decide that Mark probably needs his points adjusted and perhaps a tune-up. So we take him to the psychiatric unit in Penrose Hospital on 12 South, which is the floor that deals with that sort of thing. After we release Banks, a month goes by, then another year, then another year, then a third year. I think about this all the time. Who killed you, Mary? Somebody made you dead. Who in your evil group of friends could have done that? We're out of ammunition. We have no bullets for our gun. We have no new information from anyone.
You know, it's kind of like, well, here's a case that after all this time probably won't be solved.
But on a chilly spring morning in March 1995, nearly 9 years to the day after Eric Houston was murdered, Lieutenant Kenda receives a new lead.
One of my detectives comes into me and he says,
Lieutenant, we've got a informant that's come forward on the Eric Houston case.
Really?
That caused me to sit up straight behind my desk, and I said, so how good of an informant is he?
He's as good as they come. He's from that area and knows a lot of people.
Why now? Why 9 years later? I'm suspicious already. I think, here we go again, another Mark Banks.
According to the detective, his source is a man who for years made his home on the streets of Colorado Springs' west side.
How do we know he's legit?
He hung around the Amarillo Motel quite a bit and knows a lot of those people.
Now that works very well.
All right, get him in here.
When the informant arrives at the station, he insists on remaining anonymous.
I'm Detective Kenda. I appreciate you coming in. I understand you have some information for us about Eric Houston's murder?
I do, yeah. Before I say anything, though, I really want to make sure that my name isn't going to get out to anybody.
That's not a problem at all.
I was partying with a bunch of friends.
He says that he is having a conversation with a lifelong acquaintance within days of Eric's murder, that he and a friend of his are with this individual discussing their criminal exploits when this third person says to both of these guys,
I'm Eric Houston's killer.
Who is this guy?
His name's Arthur Anaya.
It's the same Arthur Anaya Kenda interrogated and collected blood and fingerprint samples from nearly a decade ago.
We talked to him, but we had nothing on him at the time.
Arthur tells both of these guys that Arthur and his good friend, Bobby Lee Chavez, decide they're going to rob Eric Houston. So they go over there to Eric's place. They confront Eric. They demand money.
I know you got it.
I don't have any money.
Dude, don't lie to me.
on the table.
I know you got money. Don't lie to me.
He tells him he's broke. The last thing he had money for, he just bought a bottle of vodka.
And Arthur goes off. He's got a temper on him. He just freaks out. And Bobby takes the guy's liquor and starts drinking a bottle of his liquor.
Look, he's drinking it, man.
When Eric protested, Arthur Anaya flew into a rage. He grabbed a nearby kitchen knife and stabbed Eric with it over and over and over.
And he got cut when he did that. And it hurt. And he was trying to stop the bleeding in the sink.
According to the informant, after Arthur Anaya and Bobby Chavez realized Eric was dead, they stole his stereo and fled the scene.
Grab stereo, man.
He took his boombox and his stereo receiver. Now the press never knew that there was property missing out of that room. And this guy just identified it.
And that's not the only reason Kenda likes this informant's story. It explains why the original fingerprint and blood analysis done on Arthur Anaya wasn't a complete match for the killer.
The fingerprints are not matching up. The blood type did.
We always assumed it was one guy. He says it's two. I always assumed that the prints and the blood would be from the same person. I was wrong. We asked the informant after he told us this story of how Arthur killed Eric, why did you keep this a secret? Because Arthur looked at both of us when he realized what he'd just done, that he had confessed to a murder. And he said, if you ever tell anybody this, I will kill you and your families. They believed him.
It's the ultimate breakthrough in a case that's haunted Kenda for nearly a decade.
When we talked to Arthur Anaya in January of 1987, I had nothing to pressure him with. Now I'm in a different position entirely. I have a lot of information, and I'm about to get more. Where is he? He's somewhere, and I don't know where. We need to find this person.
Lt.Joe Kenda believes he's on the verge of solving the coldest of cold cases, the 9-year-old murder of Eric Houston, a mentally disabled man who was stabbed 27 times.
Eric's justice waited 9 years. It's time for Eric to be put to rest, and it's time for the people responsible to pay the price.
An informant has told Kenda that career criminal Arthur Anaya confessed that he and a friend, Bobby Lee Chavez, had gone to Eric's room at the Amarillo Motel to rob him.
Where's it at, man? What are you doing? Where's the money? I don't have any money. I know you got it. I know you got it.
But when Eric didn't have any money, Anaya went berserk and stabbed him to death.
When we talked to Arthur Anaya before, I had no facts and no information in my possession to lead me to believe he was any more involved in this crime than anyone else. So I listened to what he had to say and we let him go because we had no option. Now I'm in a different position entirely.
It doesn't take Kenda long to track down his prime suspect.
No weapon.
Arthur is easy to arrest. He's in prison for shooting his niece. He's arrested in custody, served with a warrant for first-degree murder, advised of his rights, and he invokes. I'm not going to say a word. Well, that's okay, Arthur. You don't need to say a word, because we can say a lot of words.
Enjoy your stay.
With a decade of breakthroughs in forensic science on his side, Kenda is now armed with more than just the testimony of his informant.
We took new blood from him. They checked it again. Absolutely, that's him. That's his blood on the floor, on the sink. It's Arthur Juan Anaya's blood, and it's no one else's.
At long last, Kenda has unmasked Eric Houston's killer. But he's not through just yet. There's still the matter of Arthur Anaya's accomplice.
Did you pull it up?
Yeah, Bobby Lee Chavez.
What do we got?
We pull up his history, it's enormous. He assaults people with deadly weapons. He's been involved in shootings and stabbings and bar fights and thefts. You name it, he's done it.
All right, what we got is prints. Let's run the ones that we have over to the lab, see if we get a match.
Thanks to his lengthy rap sheet, Bobby Lee Chavez's prints are already on file.
We were able to compare them to fingerprints we found on the liquor bottle at the Amarillo Motel.
This is Kenda.
They call me an hour later.
It's a match?
The prints in the vodka bottle are the left index finger and left thumb of Bobby Lee Chavez.
That's fantastic news.
I almost dropped the phone. This is no longer good, it's beyond good. These are the dudes.
Yes, it's Lieutenant Kenda. I need to have arrest warrants issued.
Bobby Chavez, after the warrant was obtained, was subsequently arrested in Trinidad, Colorado. At the time, he was working as a driver for a laundry company.
Armed with irrefutable DNA evidence, Arthur Anaya and Bobby Chavez are charged with first-degree murder for killing Eric Houston.
This was the first time that DNA evidence was used to solve a crime in Colorado Springs. So that's what made it an important story. And it sort of brought us into the new era of police investigation and a new way of us being able to go back and solve so many of these unsolved cases.
DNA was the greatest game changer in law enforcement since the invention of the fingerprint examiner. It was a remarkable way to distinguish one human from another. And more importantly, it's one human from any other. You spend 9 years of your life thinking about a case and finally getting it done. It's resolved beyond any doubt, not just a reasonable doubt, beyond any doubt.
They were violent people. They were people that, didn't care about who they took advantage of or who they possibly hurt. They had done that in the past and probably would continue to do it. They were thugs and criminals and people that should be taken off the street. And unfortunately for Eric, he was the one that brought them to justice after all those years, but they were people that needed to be brought to justice.
For Detective Kenda, there's satisfaction in solving one of the most troubling murders of his career. But as he packs up the files one last time, he can't help but mourn the tragic death of a young man who battled adversity his entire life, only to see it snuffed out in the most brutal way imaginable.
It's these two guys who killed Eric Stanley Houston for the standard reason. No reason at all. For Arthur Anaya, it was nothing more than a chapter in that week's activities. The same with Bobby Lee Chavez. It ended Eric's life, but it meant nothing to the people who took it from him. It meant something to me.
The call comes in just before dawn, a thin voice cutting through the static, a neighbor swearing they heard something they were never meant to hear, a sound that didn't belong in a quiet Australian street where mornings usually arrive with magpies and kettle whistles, not sirens, not fear, not the heavy knowledge that a door has been crossed and cannot be closed again. By the time the first patrol car rolls in, the sky is bruised purple, the air damp, the house already holding its breath, windows dark, curtains still, as if the walls themselves are listening. Inside, nothing screams at first glance. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. Just a stillness so complete it feels staged, rehearsed, wrong. Then they find the body, and the silence breaks open like a fault line. She lies where she fell, or where she was placed, and no one can say which yet. A woman in her early 30s, known to the neighbors by her first name and her habit of jogging at sunset, now reduced to a police report number and a time of death that will be debated for years. There are marks that suggest violence, but not the kind that tells a clean story. No weapon left behind. No note. No obvious reason. The house looks lived in, not ransacked, not staged to look like chaos. This wasn't a robbery that went wrong. This wasn't random. That much is clear almost immediately, and clarity like that only deepens the dread. Word spreads faster than the forensic teams can work. By mid-morning, the street is sealed, tape fluttering like a warning flag, cameras arriving, microphones extended, reporters practicing the phrase cold case even before the sun has fully burned off the fog. A killing in 2010, in a suburb that prides itself on safety, on knowing your neighbors, on leaving doors unlocked during the day. Shock ripples outward, from the footpath to the cafes to the local school where parents huddle in tight knots, whispering names, speculating, wondering who could have done this and why. Everyone knows her, or thinks they do. Everyone starts replaying their last conversation, their last wave, searching for meaning that wasn't there at the time. Investigators move through the house slowly, methodically, their voices low, their gloves snapping on and off, every step photographed, catalogued, preserved. They find traces, but nothing that shouts. A partial print smudged on a door frame. Fibers that could belong to anyone. A phone on the kitchen counter, screen dark, last call made hours earlier to a number that leads nowhere obvious. There's no sign of forced entry, a detail that settles heavily into the case file, underlined, circled, revisited again and again. Whoever did this was either invited in, or knew how to enter without leaving a trace. Both possibilities are equally unsettling. Outside, The community watches, stunned, waiting for answers that don't come. Police give brief statements, careful with their words, promising a thorough investigation, asking for anyone with information to come forward. Tips flood in. Some are genuine. Some are fueled by fear, by gossip, by the sudden urge to explain the unexplainable. A strange car seen parked down the street days earlier. An argument overheard through a thin fence. A shadow moving where it shouldn't have been. Each lead is logged, chased, weighed, and most of them collapse under scrutiny, leaving behind only the residue of suspicion. As days turn into weeks, the victim's life is laid bare in press clippings and whispered conversations. Her job, her routines, her friendships, her recent breakup, all dissected as if meaning can be forced from the fragments. Detectives interview friends, colleagues, family members, ex-partners, anyone who crossed her path in the days and weeks before her death. Some interviews yield tears. Others yield defensiveness. None yield the one thing everyone is waiting for, a clear suspect. Alibis overlap just enough to blur. Timelines refuse to line up cleanly. The more questions are asked, the more the case seems to expand, like a dark stain spreading across paper. There is a moment, early on, when hope spikes. A piece of evidence that looks promising, a match that seems too close to ignore. The media runs with it, headlines sharp and confident, community members daring to believe that justice is already on its way. But hope, in this case, is fragile. The match falls apart under closer analysis. The suspect is cleared. The headlines retract themselves in smaller print, quieter tones. The community exhales, then tightens again, the uncertainty settling back in like a low, persistent hum. Months pass. The house is cleaned, then sold, but the street never quite returns to normal. People lock their doors now. They look twice at strangers. The case remains open, but active leads thin out, replaced by periodic reviews and renewed appeals timed to anniversaries. Detectives rotate off, new ones rotate on, each bringing fresh eyes, each eventually running up against the same wall. Evidence that won't speak. Witnesses who remember less with each passing year. A crime scene that has given all it's going to give. By the first anniversary, the word cold begins to appear more often, slipping into official language and news reports alike. Cold case doesn't mean forgotten, but it does mean stalled, suspended in a kind of investigative limbo. The victim's family refuses to let it fade. They hold vigils. They speak to the press. They keep her name alive, even as the public's attention drifts to newer tragedies. Grief hardens into determination, but determination alone can't solve what evidence cannot. There are rumors, always rumors. A witness who came forward too late. A piece of evidence mishandled. A suspect protected by circumstance or influence. None of it can be proven, but all of it feeds the sense that the truth is just out of reach, visible but unreachable, like a shape behind frosted glass. The detectives feel it too. They revisit old files late at night, reread transcripts, stare at photos until the details blur. Every unsolved case carries a weight, but this one presses harder, because it feels close, because it feels like it should have been solved already. Years roll on. Technology advances. Techniques improve. Evidence is re-examined with new tools, new methods, new hopes. Some samples yield nothing. Others raise more questions than answers. The case flickers back into the spotlight briefly, then recedes again, a cycle that repeats with numbing regularity. To the outside world, it's a mystery from the past. To those who lived it, who worked it, who lost someone to it, it's a wound that never closed. In the quiet moments, the questions return, sharper than ever. Who was in that house before dawn? What did they want? How did they leave without being seen? Somewhere, someone knows what happened. That knowledge exists in the world, breathing, aging, moving through ordinary days while an entire community remains trapped in the moment everything went wrong. The killing sits in the collective memory like an unsolved equation, a reminder that even in places that feel safe, even in years that promise progress, darkness can arrive unannounced and leave without a trace, taking its answers with it, and daring anyone left behind to try and catch up. The days after the funeral move strangely, too fast and too slow at the same time, the kind of days where clocks keep ticking but nothing feels like it's actually progressing, and inside the investigation room the air grows stale with the weight of unanswered questions and cold coffee. Detectives pin photographs to boards, draw lines between names, addresses, phone records, routines, habits, trying to force order onto a story that refuses to settle. Every life leaves patterns, they tell themselves, every crime leaves a signature, but this one seems to erase itself at every turn, like footsteps in sand washed flat by the tide. They start with the obvious, because that's where every case begins, and because the public expects it. The ex-partner is questioned again, then again, timelines scrutinized down to the minute, movements traced across the city through receipts, security cameras, witnesses who remember seeing him somewhere else, far from the house, far from the moment everything stopped. Friends are interviewed, co-workers pulled aside during lunch breaks, their shock giving way to frustration as the same questions repeat, slightly rephrased, slightly sharper each time. Did she mention being afraid? Did she talk about someone new? Did she seem distracted, anxious, secretive? The answers circle back on themselves, vague, inconclusive, the kind that feel important but lead nowhere. A witness comes forward claiming they saw a man walking quickly away from the area around the estimated time of death, head down, hoodie pulled tight despite the mild weather. Composite sketches are drawn, released, redrawn. The face becomes familiar to everyone and no one, a ghost assembled from half-remembered glances. Tips pour in again. Some people are convinced they recognize the sketch. Others insist it looks like someone they know. Each lead is chased, each door knocked on, each potential suspect photographed, fingerprinted, then quietly crossed off the list. The man in the hoodie dissolves into the city, into possibility, into nothing. Inside the house, forensic reports come back thick with technical language and thin on certainty. Blood spatter analysis suggests a sudden, violent confrontation, but not a prolonged struggle. There are no defensive wounds that tell a clear story of resistance. Toxicology reveals nothing unexpected. The cause of death is clear enough, but the why and the who remain stubbornly out of reach. The absence of a murder weapon becomes its own presence, a negative space that dominates every discussion. If the weapon left with the killer, then the killer left calmly enough to take it. Calm implies control. Control implies familiarity. Or experience. Or both. Detectives return to the detail that refuses to let go, no forced entry. Doors intact. Locks undamaged. Windows closed. Someone either had access or knew how to make it look that way. They test keys, interview locksmiths, ask about spare copies given to friends, family, tradespeople. A plumber who had been there weeks earlier. A real estate agent who once showed the house. A neighbor who borrowed a key to water plants during a holiday months before. Each scenario opens a door and then quietly closes it again, leaving only the echo of what might have been. Media pressure intensifies, then shifts, then flares again with each new rumor. Headlines alternate between urgency and resignation, between hope and the creeping language of permanence. Cold case. Unsolved. Mystery deepens. The community consumes every update, every press conference, reading between lines, watching body language, trying to detect confidence or doubt in the faces of officers who have learned how to reveal nothing at all. Online forums light up with theories, some thoughtful, some wild, some cruel. Armchair detectives argue late into the night, connecting dots the official investigation cannot. The family watches it all, helpless, furious, exhausted. They know details the public doesn't. They suspect things they cannot prove. They feel the investigation slowing, even as they are told it hasn't, but work continues behind the scenes. And it does, in a way, but momentum is a fragile thing. Cases like this burn hot at first, then cool despite everyone's efforts. Files grow thicker. Leads grow thinner. Detectives are reassigned, promoted, transferred. New names appear on the case folder, bringing fresh determination and the same inevitable collision with unanswered questions. A break almost happens when a piece of clothing, found discarded not far from the scene, is re-examined. It had been logged early on, dismissed as unrelated, but something about it nags at a junior investigator who wasn't there in 2010, who doesn't carry the same assumptions. The fabric is tested again. The fibers compared. For a moment, the room holds its breath. Then the results come back inconclusive, contaminated by time, by exposure, by the countless ways evidence degrades when it's left too long in the world. Another almost. Another door closing softly. Years stretch out, measured by anniversaries and renewed appeals. Faces in the photographs age. Streets change. Shops close and reopen under new names. The house becomes just another address to newcomers who don't know its history, who don't feel the weight when they walk past. But for those who remember, the case never quite recedes. It surfaces in conversations, in late-night news segments, in the uneasy silence that falls when someone asks if there's been any update, any progress, any news at all. Inside police headquarters, the case is reviewed again, this time with technology that didn't exist when it began. Old evidence is digitized. Files are cross-referenced with databases that have grown exponentially. Names once cleared are checked again, not because of suspicion, but because time changes contexts. Alibis that held once might not hold now. People who were unreachable then might be reachable now. But even with sharper tools, the same fundamental problem remains: the case is built on absence. No eyewitness. No confession. No definitive physical link tying any one person to the crime scene at the moment it mattered. There's talk, always talk, of someone who knows something staying silent. A friend protecting a friend. A partner covering for a partner. A secret kept out of fear, or loyalty, or guilt. Detectives appeal directly to that hypothetical person in public statements, their words carefully chosen, their tone shifting from authoritative to almost pleading. If you know something, now is the time. The right time. The only time. The words hang in the air, unanswered. As the decade mark passes, the case becomes a reference point, a cautionary tale, reminder used in training sessions and community meetings. It's cited as proof that not all crimes are solved, that some questions remain open longer than anyone expects. For the investigators still attached to it, the case becomes personal. They see it in their dreams. They imagine scenarios, alternate timelines where a different decision led to a different outcome. They wonder what they missed in the first hours, the first days, the window when answers are closest and most fragile. And through it all, the central image remains unchanged: a quiet house before dawn, a life interrupted, a community shaken awake. The file sits on a shelf and on a server and in the minds of those who refuse to let it go, marked unresolved, unsatisfied, unfinished. Somewhere, the truth continues to exist, untouched by procedure or policy, waiting, silent, while time keeps moving forward, carrying everyone else with it and leaving this one moment stubbornly, painfully still. Time does what it always does when answers refuse to appear: it stretches the mystery instead of shrinking it, pulls it thin across calendars and seasons until the original shock dulls at the edges but never disappears, and somewhere between the second and third year the case stops feeling like a breaking news story and starts feeling like a bruise the community has learned to live with, tender if pressed, invisible if ignored. Inside the investigation, though, there is no luxury of forgetting, only the grinding routine of rechecking what has already been checked and asking whether the obvious has been hiding something all along. Attention turns inward, toward the people closest to her orbit, not because new evidence points there, but because statistically it has to be looked at again. Friends who were once cooperative now sound tired, irritated, wary of having their words twisted into suspicion. One name resurfaces more than the others, not as an accusation, but as an unresolved question, someone whose relationship with her ended badly enough to leave emotional debris but cleanly enough to survive legal scrutiny. Detectives know the pattern: how proximity can look like guilt when there is nothing else to hold on to, and they tread carefully, knowing a wrong move can destroy a life without solving the crime. Phone records are pulled again, mapped visually this time, lines crisscrossing a digital grid that represents days leading up to the killing. Calls made, calls missed, numbers saved under nicknames that mean nothing to anyone else. One call stands out, not because it's suspicious on its own, but because it's ordinary, made late at night, brief, unanswered. Investigators trace it to a prepaid phone, purchased with cash, activated and then discarded like a ghost. No name, no billing address, no trail that leads anywhere solid. The phone becomes a symbol of the case itself, present, undeniable, and impossible to anchor to a human being. A former co-worker comes forward with a story that sounds compelling in the retelling, a tense exchange, raised voices, a comment that now feels ominous in hindsight. Media outlets latch onto it instantly, running with headlines that hint at motive without stating it outright. The co-worker is questioned, their movements verified, their story stripped of its drama and laid bare under fluorescent lights. The tension dissolves into misunderstanding, coincidence, the kind of everyday conflict that exists in thousands of lives that never end in bloodshed. Another promising angle evaporates, leaving behind only public suspicion that will cling to the name long after police quietly clear it. The case file grows heavier, literally and figuratively. Boxes of documents are moved from one room to another, then digitized, then backed up again, as if duplication itself might conjure answers. New detectives assigned to the case read everything from the beginning, feeling the same initial surge of confidence, the same sense that the solution must be in there somewhere, buried in plain sight. They mark pages with sticky notes, underline phrases, circle times and dates, only to reach the end with the same hollow realization as those before them: nothing connects cleanly enough to hold up in court. Outside the station, the story takes on a life of its own. Podcasts begin to mention it, forums debate it, anonymous posters claim insider knowledge they can never quite substantiate. Some insist the killer was a stranger who got lucky. Others argue it had to be someone she trusted. A few weave elaborate narratives involving organized crime, secret lives, hidden debts, none of which survive even the most basic fact-checking. The noise complicates everything. Genuine tips are buried under speculation. Witnesses second-guess their own memories after reading theories online, contaminating what little certainty remains. A breakthrough seems to arrive in the form of a confession, sudden and dramatic, from a man already in custody for an unrelated offense, someone with a history of violence and a hunger for attention. He provides details that make seasoned officers pause, small things not widely reported, fragments that suggest proximity to the truth. For a brief, electric moment, the room feels different, charged, alive with the possibility that the long stalemate is about to end. But confessions have a way of unraveling, and this one does too, details shifting under pressure, timelines slipping, facts bending to fit the questions being asked. Eventually, it becomes clear that the man knows the case the way many in the public do, through news reports, through rumor, through imagination. The confession is set aside, another false summit climbed and descended. The victim's family sits through all of it, each rise and fall exacting its own toll. Hope is dangerous now, something they ration carefully, wary of being lifted only to be dropped again. They become experts in the language of police statements, in what phrases mean progress and which mean patience. They notice the pauses, the careful wording, the way certainty is avoided. They keep photos on their walls, not as memorials but as anchors, reminders that behind every file number and press release there was a real person whose absence still rearranges their lives. As the investigation grinds on, subtle shifts occur in how detectives talk about the case among themselves. There's less talk of catching someone in the act and more about catching up with the past. Cold case units take a closer interest, bringing with them a different mindset, one shaped by distance rather than immediacy. They look for patterns across cases, for similarities that might link this killing to others that seemed unrelated at the time. Files from different states are compared. Modus operandi is debated. Nothing aligns neatly, but the process itself opens new lines of thought. One investigator becomes fixated on the timing, on the narrow window in which the crime could have occurred, convinced that the key lies not in who had motive, but in who had opportunity during those precise hours. Traffic data is revisited. CCTV footage from surrounding streets, once too grainy to be useful, is enhanced with newer software. Shapes emerge, vague and frustrating, a car that might be there, a figure that might be moving, pixels stretched to their limits. It's enough to suggest movement, not enough to identify it. Enough to keep going. The house itself is revisited, not physically, but in memory and documentation. Floor plans are studied. Sightlines mapped. Sound travel considered. How far would a noise carry at that hour? Who might hear it? Who might ignore it? The neighbor who made the original call is interviewed again, their recollection compared to the recording, to their earlier statements. Time has altered the memory, softened some edges, sharpened others. Nothing contradicts, nothing confirms. The sound remains a sound, unclaimed by context. Years stack up. Detectives retire. New ones inherit the case, inheriting also the quiet pressure that comes with it, the knowledge that this file has defeated others. Advances in forensic science offer periodic flashes of optimism. Touch DNA is re-examined. Partial profiles are entered into expanding databases. Near matches appear, then are ruled out. Each test is a roll of the dice, expensive, time-consuming, emotionally charged. Each negative result feels heavier than the last, not because it closes a door, but because it confirms how few doors remain. The case becomes a lesson taught to new recruits, an example of how complexity can masquerade as simplicity, how a crime scene that looks clean can be the most contaminated of all, not by evidence, but by assumptions. Veterans caution against tunnel vision, even as they admit that at this stage, some degree of focus is unavoidable. You cannot chase every shadow forever. You have to choose which ones feel most solid, even when they crumble under your hands. In the community, anniversaries are marked quietly now. There are no more large vigils, no crowds of cameras. Just a few flowers, a social media post, a local paper running a short piece reminding readers that the case remains unsolved. For some, it's a reminder. For others, it's background noise. For the family, it's a reopening of a wound that never fully closed. They live in the space between public interest and private grief, aware that attention helps, but also that it costs something every time the story resurfaces. And somewhere in all of this, the killer continues to exist, whether nearby or far away, carrying knowledge that has never been shared, that may never be shared. The investigation presses on not because success feels imminent, but because stopping would feel like surrender. Each review, each re-examination, each late-night discussion is an act of defiance against the idea that time alone can erase responsibility. The case breathes, slowly, unevenly, sustained by those who refuse to let it die, suspended in a state between past and present, waiting for the moment when something, anything, finally breaks the silence. By the 5th year, the case no longer lives on the front desks of the station but in its back rooms, in locked cabinets and password-protected drives, in the quiet persistence of a handful of people who refuse to let it dissolve into statistics. This is the phase no one outside law enforcement ever really sees, where progress isn't measured in arrests or press conferences but in margins scribbled with question marks and late nights spent staring at the same photographs until they start to feel like memories instead of evidence. The urgency has cooled, replaced by something heavier and more dangerous, familiarity. When a mystery becomes familiar, it risks becoming acceptable, and every investigator attached to the case knows that line must not be crossed. A cold case review panel is convened, bringing together detectives who were never part of the original investigation, forensic specialists with no emotional history tied to the file, analysts trained to see patterns others miss because they were too close. They sit in a room, lights dimmed, screens glowing, the victim's face projected larger than life, frozen in a photograph taken long before anyone imagined it would be used this way. The panel listens as the case is retold from start to finish, not as a story, but as a sequence of decisions. What was done? What wasn't? What was assumed? What was overlooked? There is no blame in the room, only the quiet understanding that every investigation is a product of its time. The first cracks appear not in the evidence, but in the narrative. A timeline that has been repeated for years is questioned, not because it's wrong, but because it's comfortable. The estimated time of death, once treated as a fixed point, is widened, its margins stretched by new interpretations of forensic data. A window that was once 2 hours becomes 4, then 6. That expansion changes everything. Suddenly, people who were once cleared by the narrowest of alibis are back in theoretical play, not as suspects, but as possibilities. Possibility is dangerous territory. It invites speculation, but it also invites movement. Old witness statements are replayed, not read. Audio reveals hesitations that transcripts flattened. A pause here. A correction there. The panel debates whether those moments signal deception or simply the fallibility of memory under stress. One statement, given by someone peripheral at the time, begins to feel less peripheral with each replay. Not because it contradicts known facts, but because it exists slightly outside them, describing something adjacent, something that never quite fit. A car idling longer than expected. A light switching on and off. Details dismissed as irrelevant now shimmer with potential significance. The review identifies something else too, something harder to quantify. A bias, subtle but present, toward the idea that the killer was either deeply known to the victim or a complete stranger. The panel suggests a third space, less dramatic, less cinematic, but statistically stubborn, someone known casually, peripherally, someone who existed just outside the circle of scrutiny because they felt too ordinary to examine closely. It's an uncomfortable suggestion. Ordinary doesn't make headlines. Ordinary doesn't satisfy a public hungry for villains. But ordinary, the panel reminds everyone, is often where crimes hide best. This shift sends investigators back into the case with a different lens. They revisit people who were interviewed once, briefly, cleared without much fanfare because nothing seemed to point at them strongly enough. Tradespeople. Neighbors of neighbors. Acquaintances who drifted in and out of her life without leaving much trace. The passage of time works both for and against them. Some memories have faded. Others have calcified. People say things now they wouldn't have said then, not because they are lying, but because distance changes perspective. What once felt insignificant now feels strange. What once felt normal now feels heavy with hindsight. One re-interview produces a reaction that stops a seasoned detective cold. Not a confession. Not a slip. Just a flicker, a moment of visible calculation where none should be needed. It's not enough to act on, not even close, but it's enough to note, enough to write down, enough to follow quietly. That's how cold cases move when they move at all, not with leaps, but with millimeters. The forensic side grinds forward in parallel. Evidence once thought exhausted is tested again using methods that didn't exist in 2010. Touch DNA, once too faint to be useful, now yields partial profiles that whisper instead of shout. A near match appears in a database, distant enough to be meaningless on its own, close enough to raise eyebrows. Investigators trace family trees, build genealogical maps, a painstaking process that feels more like archaeology than policing. Names branch out, multiply, collapse. It's slow, unglamorous work, and it carries the constant risk of leading nowhere. Media interest flares again when word leaks that the case is being actively reviewed. Headlines resurrect old phrases, shock community, mystery deepens, police refuse to comment. The family is caught in the middle, asked to react to developments they don't fully understand and haven't been briefed on. They learn to answer carefully, to express gratitude without expectation, hope without certainty. They've been here before. They know better than to believe this time will be different, even as they desperately want it to be. A journalist publishes a long-form piece revisiting the case, framing it as a symbol of unfinished justice, a reminder that time does not absolve violence. The article is thorough, respectful, and relentless. It brings new attention, and with it, new tips. Most are noise. Some are recycled. One, though, stands out, not because it names a suspect, but because it names a behavior, a pattern repeated in stories from different people who don't know each other, describing the same individual in slightly different contexts. Nothing criminal. Nothing explicit. Just a presence that suddenly feels larger when seen from multiple angles. Investigators follow the thread cautiously. They corroborate what can be corroborated. They map overlaps. They avoid confirmation bias, reminding themselves constantly that coincidence is not causation. The person at the center of this emerging pattern has never been in serious trouble with the law. No violent history. No obvious motive. Just proximity, timing, and a collection of small, unsettling details that refuse to align into innocence or guilt. It's the kind of gray area that defines unsolved cases, the space where certainty goes to die. The pressure builds quietly. Internally, debates grow sharper. How much is enough to justify more invasive steps? How much time is too much time? Resources are finite. Every hour spent here is an hour not spent on newer cases, newer victims. But the argument always circles back to the same point: if this case is allowed to fade, it sets a precedent, a message that some lives are easier to move past than others. No one in the room is willing to own that message. The neighborhood has changed by now. New families. New faces. Few remember the killing firsthand. For them, it's a story, a rumor attached to a street name. For the original residents, it's still visceral. They remember the sirens, the tape, the fear that crept into their routines and never fully left. They remember how quickly normality fractured. When detectives knock on doors again, reactions vary from surprise to relief to suspicion. Why now? What changed? Are you any closer? The answers are careful, non-committal, shaped by years of restraint. One night, alone in the office, a detective revisits the earliest photographs from the scene, not looking for new evidence, but trying to remember how it felt before the case hardened into procedure. Before it became a problem to solve rather than a moment to understand. They notice something small, almost laughably minor, an object in the background that never drew attention because it didn't seem relevant. It still might not be. But it doesn't sit right. The object becomes a question. The question becomes a note. The note joins a growing list of maybes. This is how the case survives, not on breakthroughs, but on refusal. Refusal to accept that the absence of answers is the same as the absence of truth. Refusal to let time do the work of erasure. Every new angle, every re-examination, every uncomfortable conversation pushes back against the silence that settled in after the sirens faded. The investigation is no longer chasing a single revelation. It's assembling a pressure system, slowly, deliberately, waiting for the moment when something, somewhere, finally gives way. And as another anniversary passes, marked quietly by those who still remember, the case remains unresolved, but no longer static. It moves, almost imperceptibly, like a glacier grinding forward beneath the surface. The mystery still holds, the answers still hidden, but the ground beneath them is shifting, and in that shift lives the faint, dangerous possibility that the story is not done yet, that the silence that has lasted for years is beginning, finally, to crack. By the time the investigation crosses into its 7th year, the case feels less like a file and more like a living thing, something that breathes quietly in the background of the station, demanding attention at odd hours, resurfacing when no one expects it. The detectives who remain attached to it don't talk about closure anymore. They talk about pressure. About leverage. About the idea that truth, like matter, cannot simply disappear, it can only change form. Somewhere, in some shape, the answers still exist, and the job is to apply enough force in the right places to make them visible. The focus narrows, not because certainty has arrived, but because diffusion has failed. Casting a wide net yielded nothing solid. Now the work becomes surgical. The list of persons of interest, once sprawling and theoretical, is trimmed down to a handful of names that refuse to go away, not because they are guilty, but because they remain unresolved. These are people who sit in the margins of the case, never fully inside the frame, never fully outside it. Casual acquaintances. Peripheral contacts. Individuals whose connection to her life was brief, ordinary, and therefore easy to overlook in the chaos of the early days. One name in particular begins to draw quiet attention, not through dramatic revelation, but through repetition. It appears in old notebooks, in passing mentions, in logs where it was never underlined because there seemed no reason to underline it. A service call. A brief interaction. A memory shared by more than one witness, each describing it slightly differently, none suggesting danger at the time. Ordinary. That word again. The most dangerous word in any unsolved case. Detectives approach carefully. They know how fragile this stage is, how easily momentum can collapse under premature pressure. They re-interview, not interrogate. They ask open-ended questions. They listen more than they speak. Time has changed the person sitting across from them. Everyone is older now. Edges are softer or harder, depending on what life has done to them. Details once forgotten are now remembered differently, not more accurately, but with added emotional weight. The detectives take it all in, filtering feeling from fact, intuition from evidence. The answers are cooperative. Almost too cooperative. No resistance. No hostility. Just a calm willingness to help, to explain, to account for movements long ago that most people would struggle to recall at all. It's not incriminating. It's unsettling. Experienced investigators learn to trust that feeling without mistaking it for proof. Unsettling is a signal, not a conclusion. They leave the interview with nothing they can act on, but with the sense that they are standing closer to the center of the storm than before. That sense follows them back to the office, into meetings, into late-night reviews where coffee grows cold and screens glow with old images. They lay out timelines again, this time with one variable shifted slightly, then another. When they adjust the expanded window of time against this person's known movements, a gap appears. Not a hole. A gap. Small. Easily explained. But real. They don't confront it yet. They corroborate. They look for independent verification. They dig into employment records, phone pings, transaction logs. Some data is gone, lost to retention limits and technological decay. Other data survives, imperfect but usable. It paints a picture that is neither clean nor damning. Just incomplete. Incompleteness becomes the enemy now, more than mystery. Parallel to this, the genealogical DNA work continues its slow, meticulous crawl. The partial profile that once whispered now speaks a little louder, not enough to name anyone directly, but enough to sketch a family tree with branches that intersect the geography of the case. It's a long shot. Everyone knows it. But long shots are all that remain. Analysts cross-reference names, addresses, ages, trying to find a convergence point where probability stops being abstract and starts feeling tangible. One convergence does emerge, faint but undeniable. A relative, distant enough to avoid immediate suspicion, close enough to share genetic markers. The relative lives interstate now, has for years, but at the time of the killing, they were not far away. Investigators tread carefully. Genetic genealogy is powerful, but it's also volatile, capable of blowing up cases if mishandled. They consult legal advisors. They document every step. They move slowly, deliberately, knowing that one misstep could compromise years of work. When they finally make contact, it's anticlimactic. The relative is confused, cooperative, shocked to be connected to something so dark. Their DNA is collected with consent. It comes back negative, but it refines the tree, pruning one branch and strengthening another. The process inches closer, like a hand groping through darkness toward a wall it can finally feel. Media interest stirs again, fueled by rumors of DNA and renewed interviews. Reporters call, emails stack up, producers push for updates. Police say nothing. They've learned that silence, though frustrating to the public, is sometimes the only way to protect fragile progress. The family, once again, feels the pull of attention and the ache of not knowing whether it means anything this time. They remind themselves not to hope. Hope has hurt them before. Behind closed doors, debates intensify. Some investigators believe the case is finally coalescing around a person. Others caution that this is how tunnel vision begins, that familiarity can masquerade as focus. The arguments are sharp but respectful. Everyone in the room knows the stakes. This is no longer just about solving a crime. It's about doing it right, about ensuring that if an answer is found, it will withstand the weight of scrutiny that comes with time and tragedy. A decision is made to apply pressure indirectly. Not through accusation, but through presence. Patrols increase subtly in relevant areas. Questions are asked of neighbors, framed as routine. Old associates are contacted under the guise of unrelated inquiries. The goal is not to scare, but to observe. Pressure reveals behavior. Behavior reveals truth, or at least fractures in the story people tell themselves. Something shifts. Not dramatically. No sudden confession. No panicked flight. Just a change in demeanor reported by someone who knows the person well enough to notice. Sleeplessness. Irritability. A sudden interest in news coverage of the case. These are not crimes. They are human reactions. But in context, they matter. They are logged, cross-checked, weighed. At the same time, the detectives return to the physical space of the crime, this time with fresh eyes and a different purpose. Not to find new evidence, but to test theories. They walk the routes again. They measure distances. They time movements. They listen to the ambient noise at different hours. What once felt abstract becomes tactile. They begin to understand how someone could move through that space without being seen, without drawing attention, if they knew where to step and when. One theory gains traction, not because it's sensational, but because it's simple. The killer didn't panic. They didn't rush. They knew the environment well enough to control the situation briefly and leave before the world woke up. That kind of confidence doesn't come from impulse. It comes from familiarity, from a sense of belonging in a place that was not theirs by right. This reframing sharpens everything. The absence of forced entry. The lack of chaos. The quiet. It all aligns, not into certainty, but into coherence. For the first time in years, the pieces don't just exist each other, they start to touch. The family is informed that the case has moved, not forward, but inward. That the focus has tightened. That nothing can be promised. They listen, nodding, absorbing the information with a practiced restraint that only years of disappointment can teach. After the meeting, one of them says something that stays with a detective long after, "Just don't let it stop again." It's not an accusation. It's a plea. As the year draws toward its end, the investigation reaches a delicate balance point. Enough has changed to justify continued intensity. Not enough has crystallized to justify decisive action. This is the most dangerous moment in any long-running case, the moment where impatience can undo patience, where belief can outrun proof. Every step is measured. Every conversation documented. Every instinct challenged. And yet, beneath the caution, there is something new, something that hasn't been there before. A sense of direction. Not a destination, but a vector. The case is no longer spinning in place. It is moving, slowly, deliberately, towards something solid. The silence that once felt impenetrable now feels strained, as if it's being asked to hold more weight than it can bear. Somewhere, the truth feels closer to the surface than it ever has. Not visible. Not yet. But pressing upward, distorting the calm, making the air heavy with anticipation. The investigators feel it. The family feels it. Even the community, largely unaware of the details, senses a shift in the way the case is spoken about, in the way the past seems less settled than it did before. The killing is still officially unsolved. No charges. No names released. But the ground beneath the mystery has changed. The story that once refused to take shape is beginning to outline itself, faintly, like an image emerging in a darkroom. And in that slow emergence lies both promise and peril, because once a shape appears, it demands to be finished, and the cost of finishing it will be felt by everyone who has carried this case, in one way or another, for far too long. By the 8th year, the investigation has entered a phase that feels almost philosophical, where facts and interpretations wrestle constantly, and the line between patience and paralysis grows thin. This is the point where many cases finally slip into permanent dormancy, not because there is nothing left to do, but because there is nothing left that feels safe to do. Every move now carries consequence. Push too hard and risk collapsing a fragile structure. Move too slowly and risk losing what little momentum remains. The detectives working this case understand that balance intimately, and it weighs on them every day. The narrowed focus remains intact, but it is no longer spoken about openly. Internally, the case has a center of gravity now, even if no one dares name it that way. Files related to that central thread are reviewed more frequently. Meetings circle back to the same timelines, the same movements, the same small inconsistencies that refuse to resolve. None of it is explosive. All of it is persistent. The case has become less about finding something new and more about understanding what has already been found, about recognizing the significance of details that once seemed too minor to matter. Surveillance is discussed, debated, approved, then scaled back. Legal thresholds loom over every decision. The person of interest has rights, protections that must be respected regardless of suspicion. Investigators remind themselves of this constantly, not just because it's the law, but because mistakes at this stage are irreversible. A single overreach could poison the well forever, turning a case that is inching forward into one that collapses under scrutiny. Instead, they watch from a distance. Patterns are observed, not interrupted. Routines mapped quietly. Nothing about the behavior is overtly criminal. In fact, it is painfully ordinary. Work, home, errands, social interactions that appear benign. Yet even normality, when viewed through the lens of an unresolved killing, carries weight. Investigators learn to read between the moments, to note what doesn't happen as much as what does. Avoided places. Avoided conversations. Avoided questions. Meanwhile, the genealogical DNA work tightens further. Another branch of the family tree is pruned. Another distant connection ruled out. The process is slow, expensive, and emotionally draining for everyone involved, including people who never asked to be connected to a homicide investigation. Detectives are acutely aware of the ethical weight of this method. Every consent form is handled carefully. Every explanation is thorough. They are not just building a case, they are building something that must withstand moral as well as legal examination. A new partial match emerges, closer this time, enough to draw a line that feels less hypothetical. Analysts double-check everything. Contamination is ruled out. Statistical margins are reviewed by independent experts. The science holds, but science alone is not enough. It never is. DNA can place someone near a story, but it cannot tell the story itself. It cannot explain intent, sequence, or choice. For that, investigators still need corroboration, context, something that ties biology to behavior. They look again at the night itself, reconstructing it in almost obsessive detail. The hours before the killing. The minutes. The seconds. They test how long it would take to move from one point to another, how long a sound would linger, how long darkness would provide cover. They bring in experts on human behavior under stress, on how people act when they believe they are unseen. These aren't dramatizations. They are controlled exercises, designed to answer narrow questions. Could someone leave without being noticed? Could they clean up enough to delay discovery? Could they carry the weight of what they had done and still appear normal days later? The answers are uncomfortable. Yes. 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 That realization doesn't bring relief. It brings a heavier burden, the knowledge that the crime was not a chaotic accident but a contained act, one that required composure. Composure suggests intent. Intent suggests forethought. And forethought shatters any lingering hope that this was a momentary lapse or an unplanned tragedy. The story that emerges is darker, quieter, and far more deliberate than anyone wants to accept. The family senses the shift before it is articulated to them. They notice it in the way detectives speak, in the questions they ask, in the careful emphasis on certain phrases. When they are finally briefed, it is done gently, without promises, without declarations. The message is measured, progress is being made, but it is fragile. Expectations must be managed. The family listens, absorbing the information with a mixture of gratitude and dread. Progress means hope. Hope means vulnerability. They have learned how dangerous that combination can be. Publicly, the case remains still. No updates. No announcements. The media grows restless, then bored, then moves on again. In the absence of information, speculation blooms once more, fed by anniversaries and recycled headlines. Some commentators accuse police of incompetence. Others accuse them of secrecy. The truth, as always, sits somewhere quieter, in the tension between what can be said and what must not. Inside the investigation, pressure builds in a different way. Funding cycles come and go. Leadership changes. Priorities shift. Each time, the detectives must justify why this case still matters, why resources should continue to be allocated to a killing that happened years ago. They make their case with data, with progress reports, with careful arguments that emphasize not just the possibility of resolution, but the principle behind it. Unsolved cases do not expire. Justice does not have a statute of limitations. One moment threatens to derail everything when a procedural error is discovered in an unrelated case involving similar investigative techniques. Legal advisors review the implications immediately. Could the same argument be made here? Could years of careful work be challenged because of a broader legal trend? The anxiety is palpable. Meetings stretch late into the night. Contingency plans are drafted. Fortunately, the risk is contained, but the scare leaves its mark. It reinforces how precarious this stage truly is. The person of interest is interviewed again, this time under different circumstances, with different questions. The tone is calm, conversational, almost casual. Investigators are not fishing for a confession. They are listening for alignment, for whether the story told now still fits the story told years ago. Small discrepancies appear, not dramatic contradictions, but subtle shifts. A detail remembered differently. A time estimated less confidently. None of it is damning. All of it is noted. When the interview ends, there is no confrontation, no accusation. The person leaves unaware of how carefully every word has been weighed. Investigators sit in silence afterward, replaying the conversation, dissecting it line by line. This is the work now. Not action, but analysis. Not noise, but precision. Another piece falls into place unexpectedly when a tip comes in from someone who had never spoken to police before. The tip is not sensational. It is hesitant, uncertain, delivered with an apology for taking so long. The caller explains that they didn't think it mattered at the time, that they didn't want to get involved, that life got in the way. What they describe is a moment, brief and easily dismissed, but it intersects with the refined timeline in a way that sends a ripple through the investigative team. They corroborate quickly. The tip holds. It doesn't answer everything, but it strengthens the structure that has been slowly forming. The case no longer feels like a collection of unrelated fragments. It feels like a pattern emerging from fog, still indistinct, but undeniably there. With that, the internal language changes again. Not solved. Not cracked. But viable. The case is now considered viable for resolution, a term that carries enormous weight behind closed doors. It means there is enough alignment between evidence, behavior, and theory to justify sustained, focused effort toward a specific outcome. It also means there is no room left for error. The detectives feel the shift in themselves. Conversations sharpen. Disagreements become more pointed. Everyone is acutely aware that this is the stretch where careers can be defined or destroyed. No one wants to be the reason the case fails after coming this far. The pressure is constant, humming beneath every interaction. At night, some of them struggle to sleep. They replay interviews in their heads. They imagine alternative explanations, forcing themselves to test their own assumptions. Could they be wrong? Could coincidence still explain everything? Could they be building a story because they want one? This internal skepticism is encouraged, even cultivated. It is the last defense against tunnel vision. Yet despite all the caution, all the doubt, something fundamental has changed. The case no longer feels static. It feels like it is leaning forward, like it has momentum of its own now, pulling the people involved along with it. The silence that once felt empty now feels charged, heavy with unspoken possibility. The killing is still officially unsolved. The public still sees a mystery frozen in time. But behind the scenes, the investigation has entered its most dangerous, most decisive phase. Every move from here on will matter more than all the moves that came before it. Every choice will echo. Somewhere, the truth is closer than it has ever been, close enough to cast a shadow. The detectives can feel it in the way the case presses against them, demanding resolution. The question is no longer whether the story can be finished. It is whether it can be finished without breaking under the weight of everything that has been carried for so long. And as the 8th year gives way to the 9th, the case stands at the edge of something irreversible, balanced between revelation and ruin, waiting for the next step to tip it one way or the other. The 9th year arrives without ceremony, without headlines, without the sense of a milestone anyone wants to acknowledge, but inside the investigation it lands heavily, like a door closing somewhere behind them. 9 years is long enough for a case to become legend and liability at the same time, long enough for institutional memory to thin and for pressure to mount from opposite directions. Solve it, or let it go. Move forward, or admit that forward might not exist. The detectives still holding the thread refuse to frame it that way. To them, the case isn't old. It's unfinished. The internal strategy shifts again, not in direction but in posture. Up to now, the investigation has been about building structure, testing theories, reinforcing weak points. Now it becomes about stress testing the whole thing, applying pressure deliberately to see where it flexes and where it breaks. This isn't about catching someone off guard. It's about forcing the truth, whatever it is, to reveal its weakest seam. They assemble a timeline that is no longer tentative. It is still adjustable, still subject to revision, but it has weight now, supported by converging sources rather than isolated guesses. Every minute in that window is accounted for as thoroughly as possible. Where certainty ends, probability begins. Where probability thins, questions sharpen. The detectives don't pretend the timeline is perfect. They treat it as a weapon that must be handled carefully. A decision is made to confront the person of interest indirectly, through their past rather than their present. Investigators revisit old workplaces, old acquaintances, people who knew them before the killing ever happened, before the case cast its long shadow. Time has changed those people too. Some are more willing to talk now, less guarded, less loyal to versions of the past that no longer feel relevant. They share impressions rather than facts, patterns rather than events. Stories emerge that are not criminal, not overtly threatening, but threaded with control, with boundaries crossed and then dismissed as misunderstandings. Nothing here would stand alone in court. That's understood. But in aggregate, it paints a psychological contour that aligns disturbingly well with the behavior inferred from the crime scene. Calm under pressure. Comfort in private spaces that weren't theirs. An ability to move through other people's lives without leaving obvious marks. Again, nothing illegal. Just context. And context is everything. At the same time, detectives re-examine their own conduct, searching for blind spots. They bring in an external consultant, someone with no stake in the outcome, to critique their approach. The consultant listens, asks pointed questions, challenges assumptions that have calcified through repetition. Why this person and not another? Why this explanation and not its inverse? The process is uncomfortable by design. Some theories weaken under scrutiny. Others survive, not because they are elegant, but because they are resilient. One fragile but crucial element solidifies when financial records from years ago, thought to be irretrievable, are recovered through a secondary source. The data is incomplete, but it confirms a presence in a place at a time that had previously been accounted for only through self-reporting. It doesn't contradict the story outright. It complicates it. Complication is often the first step toward truth. Investigators handle this discovery with restraint. They do not rush to confront. They integrate it into the larger framework, checking how it interacts with everything else. When they do bring it up in conversation, it's framed as clarification, not accusation. The response is measured, plausible, but not quite aligned. Another small discrepancy. Another notch in the growing sense that the story being told requires more effort than the truth would. Pressure continues to build, quietly. Not through intimidation, but through inevitability. Questions return that were asked years ago, now sharpened by context. Why this route? Why this timing? Why this silence? Each answer creates two more questions. The detectives are careful not to telegraph their thinking. They know that once a person realizes they are truly under scrutiny, behavior changes. For now, they want to observe the unguarded moments. The family is updated again, though updates have become a delicate art. Too much detail risks false hope. Too little risks alienation. The balance is struck with honesty and restraint. The case is active. Progress exists. Nothing is guaranteed. The family listens, absorbing the information with an expression that mixes fatigue and resolve. They have been living with uncertainty for nearly a decade. What they want now is not reassurance. It's integrity. They want to know that whatever happens next, it will be real. The community, largely unaware of these developments, continues its quiet evolution. New buildings replace old ones. Streets are repaved. Children who were too young to remember the killing grow into adults who know it only as a story. Yet the case persists in subtle ways. In the way people talk about safety. In the way they pause before opening their doors at night. In the way the name still carries weight when it's mentioned. Inside the station, the case becomes a touchstone. Younger officers know it by reputation. Older ones know it by scar tissue. It is cited in discussions about persistence, about humility, about the limits of certainty. It is also cited as a reminder that some crimes do not yield to force, only to patience. Another interview is scheduled, this time with a different tone. Not casual. Not confrontational. Just direct. The detectives lay out certain facts without interpretation. They do not accuse. They ask for help understanding. Silence stretches. The person responds, carefully, choosing words that fit but do not quite settle. The detectives note the tension, the micro-delays, the moments where explanation seems to lag behind memory. Afterward, in the quiet of the office, the team debates what it all means. Some argue that the inconsistencies are normal, the product of time and stress. Others argue that they form a pattern too consistent to ignore. The discussion is rigorous, sometimes heated, but grounded in evidence. No one wants to cross the line from suspicion to certainty without cause. Meanwhile, the forensic work delivers another incremental gain. A refined analysis of material once dismissed as background noise suggests secondary transfer under specific conditions. It's not definitive. It's conditional. But it aligns with a theory that had previously felt speculative. The alignment is noted, then tested again. It holds, not as proof, but as support. The investigators begin preparing for the possibility of a future they have not yet acknowledged openly. What if this leads somewhere? What if it doesn't? What if they are wrong? What if they are right but cannot prove it? These are not abstract questions. They are operational. They inform how evidence is preserved, how interviews are conducted, how every step is documented. The margin for error is gone now. Every action is taken with the assumption that it will one day be examined by people who were not there, who do not feel the weight of the years, who will judge the case on paper alone. A new witness comes forward, not with a dramatic revelation, but with a quiet recollection prompted by a news article shared online. The witness is hesitant, apologetic, unsure if what they remember matters. It does. Not because it introduces new facts, but because it corroborates an existing thread from a different angle. Two independent memories align. The timeline tightens. The window narrows again. This time, the movement is undeniable. The investigation shifts from theoretical viability to practical preparation. Legal counsel is consulted more frequently. Potential scenarios are mapped. Risks assessed. The detectives still do not say the word arrest. They don't need to. The air in the room has changed. Everyone can feel it. The person of interest senses it too, though nothing explicit has occurred. Behavior shifts slightly. Routines change. Not dramatically, but enough to register. The detectives note it, not as guilt, but as response. Pressure does what it always does. It reveals. As the year progresses, the case edges closer to a threshold. Not a finish line. A point of no return. The detectives understand that once they cross it, there will be no more quiet observation, no more hypothetical discussions. There will be action, and with action comes consequence. They take one last step back, collectively, to review everything. From the first call before dawn to the most recent interview. From the smallest fiber to the largest assumption. They ask the hardest question again: could this still be coincidence? The answer is not a comfortable no. It never is. But it is a reasoned one. The killing remains unsolved in the eyes of the world. Officially, nothing has changed. But beneath the surface, the story has gathered too much structure to collapse back into silence. The case is no longer waiting for something to happen. It is waiting for someone to decide that enough is enough. And in that waiting, the tension tightens, like a held breath stretched too long. The truth, whatever shape it takes, feels imminent now, close enough to disrupt sleep, close enough to cast doubt and determination in equal measure. The 9th year draws toward its end with a sense of gravity that cannot be ignored. The mystery that once felt distant now feels personal to everyone involved, not because of obsession, but because of proximity. They are closer than they have ever been, close enough to know that the next step will change everything. Whether it brings resolution or rupture remains uncertain. But the case has reached the point where standing still is no longer an option, and the silence that has protected the unknown for so long is beginning, finally, to fracture under its own weight. The 10th year doesn't announce itself with fireworks or headlines, it arrives like fatigue, settling into the bones of everyone still carrying the case, and with it comes a shift that is subtle but irreversible. This is no longer an investigation driven by curiosity or persistence alone. It is driven by consequence. Every choice made from this point forward will either move the case toward resolution or lock it into failure forever. There is no middle ground left, no comfortable space for, maybe later. The clock has not been ticking loudly, but it has never stopped. Behind closed doors, the language changes again. The word theory is used less. Position is used more. The detectives aren't guessing anymore, they are aligning. They take what they have and begin to ask a different kind of question, not what might have happened, but what they can prove happened, and what they can defend when every assumption is challenged by people who were never there, who will feel no emotional pull toward the years invested, who will only see evidence or the lack of it. They map the case as if preparing for a storm. Every vulnerability is identified. Every weak point reinforced where possible. They know exactly where the gaps are, where doubt could seep in, where defense arguments will strike hardest. The absence of a murder weapon. The passage of time. The degradation of memory. These are not surprises. They are expected obstacles, and the detectives have learned to work with them rather than pretend they don't exist. The person at the center of their focus remains outwardly unchanged, but the pressure has become ambient now, like humidity before rain. Investigators don't need to be present for it to be felt. It's in the phone calls that go unanswered a little longer than before. In the guarded conversations with people who suddenly remember things more carefully. In the way ordinary routines develop small irregularities, as if someone is testing new paths, new exits. Another interview is conducted, this time under conditions that are unmistakably formal. No accusations are made, but the gravity of the moment is clear. Certain facts are placed on the table without explanation. The intent is not to trap, but to observe how those facts are absorbed, how they are processed, how the story adjusts itself in response. The answers come, controlled, measured, almost rehearsed. It's competent. It's composed. And that composure, in this context, is louder than panic would have been. When the interview ends, the detectives do not discuss it immediately. They sit with it, letting the impression settle, resisting the urge to draw conclusions too quickly. This discipline has been hard-earned. They know that momentum can seduce even the most careful investigator into seeing what they want to see. The case has survived this long precisely because they have learned to slow down when everything in them wants to rush forward. A legal review follows, exhaustive and unforgiving. Prosecutors are briefed in hypotheticals, not names. Scenarios are discussed in abstract terms, evidence tested against potential defenses before those defenses ever materialize. The prosecutors push back hard. They ask the questions no one else wants to ask. Where is the direct link? Where is the indisputable proof? Where is the moment that ties everything together without relying on interpretation? The detectives listen, not defensively, but attentively. This scrutiny is not an obstacle. It is a filter. The answer, when it emerges, is not a single piece of evidence, but convergence. No one element carries the weight alone. Together, they begin to form something that can stand. Behavioral alignment. Forensic consistency. Timeline coherence. Witness corroboration from independent sources. None of it dramatic. All of it cumulative. This is how cases like this are solved, not with revelations, but with accumulation. The family is brought in again, this time with a tone that is different from before. Still cautious. Still restrained. But different. They are told that the case is approaching a critical stage. That decisions will be made soon. That they should prepare themselves for movement, whatever form that movement takes. The family listens in silence. They have lived in uncertainty for a decade. What frightens them now is not the unknown, but the possibility that the truth, once revealed, will be something they cannot unlearn. Outside, the world continues as it always has. New cycles spin. New tragedies replace old ones. The killing, once a fixture in public consciousness, has faded to a footnote for most. This quiet works in the investigators' favor now. There is less noise. Less interference. Fewer eyes misinterpreting every step. The work proceeds in a kind of vacuum, focused, deliberate, insulated from spectacle. Then something unexpected happens. Not a breakthrough in the traditional sense, but a rupture in the calm. A routine check yields a reaction that cannot be explained away as coincidence. A line that has been walked carefully for years is crossed, not by police, but by the person they have been watching. It's a small thing. A decision that doesn't make sense unless viewed through the lens of fear. Not proof. Not even close. But a signal. The detectives do not overreact. They document. They verify. They watch. They know better than to treat every anomaly as a confession. But this one sits differently. It aligns too neatly with the timing, with the pressure, with the internal milestones the investigation has reached. It suggests awareness. Awareness of something approaching. The internal debate becomes sharper now. Some argue it's time to act, that waiting longer risks losing control of the situation. Others argue that patience has been the case's greatest strength, and abandoning it now could undo everything. The discussion is intense, but grounded. Everyone understands the stakes. This is the decision point that defines cold cases, the moment where instinct and discipline collide. They return again to the night of the killing, not because they expect new answers, but because they need to remind themselves what this is all about. A life ended violently and quietly. A community altered. A family suspended in grief. The crime scene photos are reviewed once more, not clinically, but deliberately. This is not about abstraction. It is about responsibility. A final piece slides into place when a witness, previously dismissed as unreliable due to minor inconsistencies, is re-examined under the refined timeline. Their account, once considered too vague to matter, now fits with unsettling precision. The inconsistencies don't disappear. They become understandable, the product of stress rather than deception. The witness's recollection, when aligned with everything else, becomes supportive instead of contradictory. This is the moment when the investigation changes shape. It stops expanding and starts contracting, pulling inward toward a single axis. The detectives feel it immediately. The room feels different. Conversations shorten. Decisions accelerate. There is no celebration. No sense of victory. Only focus. Legal counsel is consulted again, this time with specifics. The question is no longer hypothetical viability. It is risk assessment. What happens if they move now? What happens if they don't? The answers are not comforting. They never are. But they are clear enough to guide action. Surveillance is adjusted. Not escalated dramatically, but refined. Every move is calculated. The goal is not to provoke, but to preserve. Evidence must be protected. People must be safe. The investigators know that when long-running cases finally move, they can do so unpredictably. Desperation, if it exists, is dangerous. The person of interest is not informed of anything directly. There are no warnings. No confrontations. The case proceeds on parallel tracks now, investigative and legal, each step synchronized with the other. This coordination has been years in the making, built on trust between detectives and prosecutors who understand that neither can succeed without the other. The family waits, suspended once more in a familiar but altered space. They know something is happening. They can feel it in the gaps between phone calls, in the careful phrasing of updates, in the way conversations end with "soon" instead of "we'll see." Soon is a dangerous word. It carries weight. It carries promise. It carries the risk of collapse. As weeks pass, the final review is conducted. Every piece of evidence is laid out as it would be in court. Every assumption is challenged one last time. The hardest question is asked again, the one that has haunted the case from the beginning. Could this still be wrong? Could all of this still be coincidence? The answer, after a decade of restraint, is no longer theoretical. It is practical. It is defensible. The decision is made. It is not announced. It is not dramatic. It is simply recorded, documented, signed. The machinery that has been idling for years begins to turn, slowly at first, then with gathering force. Warrants are prepared with surgical precision. Timelines are locked. Roles are assigned. Contingencies planned. No one sleeps well that night. The detectives replay the years in their heads, every false lead, every disappointment, every moment where the case could have died but didn't. They know that whatever happens next will not erase that history. It will add to it. The community wakes up unaware that something has shifted beneath the surface. The house where it all began stands quietly, just another structure on a familiar street. Nothing about it signals what it holds, what it has held for 10 years. But the silence around it feels thinner now, stretched taut by the weight of what is about to break it. The killing is still, officially, unsolved. No statements have been made. No names spoken publicly. But the case has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. The question is no longer whether the truth will surface. It is how violently the silence will resist when it does. The moment arrives without sound, without countdown, without the kind of cinematic warning people imagine precedes history, and yet everyone involved feels it when it happens, a subtle tightening in the chest, a shift in posture, the unspoken understanding that the investigation has moved from preparation to execution. This is the point where theory gives way to consequence, where every choice made over the past decade begins to demand its price. There is no turning back now, only forward, into whatever truth has been waiting all this time. The operation unfolds quietly, deliberately, designed to leave no footprint larger than necessary. Warrants are served with precision, not force. Questions are asked carefully, not aggressively. Evidence is collected methodically, not theatrically. This is not about spectacle. It is about control. The detectives know that cold cases do not erupt, they crystallize. The goal is not to shock the system, but to preserve it long enough for the truth to be extracted intact. The person at the center of the case reacts exactly as expected and not at all as predicted. There is no explosion of anger. No visible panic. Just a pause, a momentary recalibration, as if a long-running internal calculation has reached a new variable. Cooperation follows. Calm answers. A willingness to engage that feels almost rehearsed. This composure does not reassure anyone. It deepens the tension. Composure under this kind of pressure is never neutral. The detectives listen, recording every word, every inflection, every deviation from previous statements. They are not looking for a confession. They are looking for fracture. They understand now that if the truth comes out, it will not arrive in a single dramatic admission. It will seep out through inconsistencies, through the cumulative weight of details that can no longer support the story built to contain them. Evidence gathered during this phase is not new in the traditional sense. It is contextual. Items once considered peripheral are now reclassified as central, not because they have changed, but because the framework around them has. A timeline tightens again. A movement once thought insignificant becomes critical. A choice once dismissed as random begins to look deliberate. The case does not pivot. It locks. Legal teams move in parallel, reviewing every step in real time. This is the invisible backbone of the operation, the part no one outside the process ever sees. Every decision is weighed not just for its investigative value, but for its survivability under attack. 10 years of work can be undone by a single procedural misstep. No one forgets that for even a moment. The family is notified that something is happening, though details remain sparse. They feel the familiar pull of anticipation and fear, the knowledge that movement does not guarantee resolution. They have learned not to imagine outcomes. They wait, suspended, aware that whatever comes next will redefine the past 10 years of their lives in ways they cannot yet comprehend. As the process continues, the person of interest begins to feel the walls closing in, not physically, but psychologically. Conversations that once flowed easily become more guarded. Answers grow shorter. Memory falters selectively. This is not evidence of guilt. It is evidence of strain. Strain reveals where structures are weakest. One interview, conducted late, stretches longer than expected. Silence fills the room in intervals that feel heavier than words. The detectives do not rush to fill it. Silence has its own gravity. When speech resumes, something changes. A detail slips, minor, almost laughably small. But it does not align with the refined timeline. It cannot be reconciled without bending something else out of shape. The detectives note it. They do not react. They allow the conversation to continue, allowing the inconsistency to exist without challenge. This is how pressure works best, when it is not applied directly, but allowed to accumulate internally. People will often correct themselves when given the space to feel the weight of their own contradictions. The correction comes later, unprompted, in a different context. It is clumsy. It draws attention. It creates a ripple that spreads backward through previous statements, touching things that were once stable and making them wobble. This is the fracture they have been waiting for. Not a break. A crack. Evidence is reanalyzed in light of this shift. Patterns emerge that were invisible before, not because they were hidden, but because the lens was slightly off. With the lens corrected, alignment improves. Not perfectly. Nothing ever aligns perfectly after this much time. But enough. The decision to move forward becomes inevitable, not because the case is flawless, but because it has crossed the threshold from speculative to sustainable. The risk of acting is now lower than the risk of waiting. This is the calculus that defines late-stage investigations. It is never comfortable. It is never certain. It is necessary. Procedures accelerate. Documentation is finalized. Statements are locked. The machinery of justice, dormant for years, begins to hum with purpose. The detectives feel the shift viscerally. This is what they have been working toward, not an ending, but a confrontation between narrative and reality. The community senses something too, though no official word has been released. Rumors move faster than facts. A marked vehicle seen in the wrong place. An unusual presence near familiar streets. Whispers ripple through social circles, cautious and speculative. The case, long dormant in public consciousness, begins to surface again, like something rising from deep water. Media outlets start calling. Questions are deflected. Statements are prepared and then shelved. Timing is everything now. The wrong sentence spoken too early could poison the well. Silence, once a symptom of stagnation, becomes a tool. The family receives a call they have waited a decade for and dreaded just as long. They are told that an arrest is imminent. Not guaranteed. Imminent. The word lands heavily. It does not bring relief. It brings a flood of emotion that has nowhere to go yet. Relief will come later, if it comes at all. Right now there is only intensity. When the arrest happens, it is quiet. No sirens. No crowd. No spectacle. Just a knock, an explanation, a set of rights read in a calm, professional tone. The person listens, nods, complies. Neighbors watch from behind curtains, sensing significance without understanding it fully. This is not how justice looks in movies. This is how it looks when it has been delayed, tempered, and weighed for 10 long years. News breaks quickly once the arrest is confirmed. Headlines explode with words that feel almost unreal after so much waiting. Cold case. Breakthrough. Arrest made. Shock community. The language is familiar, but the impact is different now. It lands on a public that had largely moved on, forcing it to remember, to recontextualize a story it thought was finished. Reactions are immediate and polarized. Some express relief. Others express doubt. Skepticism surfaces, fueled by the passage of time and the absence of a simple narrative. How could this take so long? Why now? What changed? The answers are complex and unsatisfying to anyone looking for clean resolution. Inside the system, the work is far from over. An arrest is not a conclusion. It is the beginning of a new phase, one governed by different rules, different pressures. The burden of proof shifts. The case must now survive scrutiny from defense teams whose job is not to understand the story, but to dismantle it. The detectives feel this shift acutely. Their role changes from seekers to guardians of a narrative that must now stand on its own. Every choice they made over the years will be examined, questioned, attacked. They prepare for that with the same discipline that carried them this far. Nothing is assumed. Everything is justified. The person charged maintains composure. There is no public display of remorse or outrage. Statements are minimal. Legal counsel takes over. Silence returns, but it is a different kind of silence now, charged with anticipation rather than absence. The family stands before cameras briefly, offering words that are careful, restrained, shaped by a decade of uncertainty. They do not declare victory. They do not claim closure. They speak of patience, of gratitude, of the long road still ahead. They know better than anyone that resolution is not a moment. It is a process. As the legal proceedings begin to take shape, details emerge slowly, filtered through court documents and official statements. The public learns fragments of what investigators have carried for years. The absence of forced entry. The narrow window. The quiet control. The story begins to coalesce, but it remains incomplete, as all legal narratives do until they are tested in open court. The house, the street, the community are thrust back into the spotlight. Old memories resurface. New questions arise. The past refuses to stay past. For some, the arrest brings a sense of validation. For others, it opens wounds they had learned to live around. There is no single reaction. There never is. The detectives watch all of this with a mixture of relief and apprehension. They have reached a milestone, not a finish line. The case has not ended. It has transformed. The silence that once defined it has been broken, but what replaces silence is noise, argument, interpretation. This too must be navigated carefully. In quiet moments, some of them think back to the early days, to the first call before dawn, to the house holding its breath, to the sense that something had gone terribly wrong in a place that believed itself safe. They think about how much time has passed, how much has changed, and how some things have not changed at all. The truth, whatever shape it ultimately takes in court, has already altered the landscape. It has proven that time does not erase responsibility. That persistence matters. That silence, no matter how long it holds, can be fractured. The killing that once seemed destined to remain an unsolved footnote has re-entered the present, demanding to be reckoned with. The story is no longer frozen. It is moving again, toward judgment, toward reckoning, toward an ending that no one can yet define. And as the world reacts, debates, and speculates, those closest to the case understand something the headlines never will. This was never about a single moment of violence. It was about the years that followed, the endurance of unanswered questions, the cost of waiting. The arrest is not the end of the story. It is the moment the story finally begins to speak back. The courtroom does not feel like a place of answers. It feels like a pressure chamber, sealed and humming, where every word spoken carries weight far beyond its syllables. This is where the story, once whispered and speculated over for a decade, is forced into structure, forced to choose edges and corners, forced to stand still while strangers decide whether it holds. The killing that lived in silence for so long is now surrounded by microphones, transcripts, and rules that do not bend for grief. The accused sits motionless, a familiar composure settling in like armor. It is the same calm investigators saw in interviews, the same measured stillness that never cracked when questions pressed too close. To some in the room, it reads as confidence. To others, as detachment. No one can agree on what it means, and that ambiguity becomes part of the spectacle. Every glance is analyzed. Every shift of posture becomes a headline waiting to be written. The prosecution begins carefully, not with the night of the killing, but with the years that followed. They talk about absence. About silence. About how a life can vanish from a place without chaos, without forced entry, without witnesses screaming into the night. They build the case slowly, deliberately, brick by brick, aware that speed would only weaken what took 10 years to assemble. This is not a story meant to overwhelm. It is a story meant to endure scrutiny. Evidence is introduced not as revelation, but as alignment. Timelines layered over one another. Movements traced with precision that did not exist in the early days. The jury is shown how small windows matter, how minutes narrow possibilities, how certain actions make sense only if others happened first. Nothing is presented as dramatic. Everything is presented as inevitable. The defense responds with a familiar strategy. Time. Memory. Doubt. They remind the court that 10 years is a long time, long enough for details to blur, long enough for assumptions to harden into belief. They question the reliability of witnesses who waited years to speak. They attack the absence of a weapon. They emphasize what is not there, what cannot be produced, what will never be recovered. Their argument is simple and powerful. If the truth were clear, it would not have taken this long. The detectives listen from the gallery, hearing their work translated into language that no longer belongs to them. Every decision they made is reframed. Every hesitation questioned. This is the price of persistence. They know it. They accept it. What matters now is not how the case was built, but whether it can stand without them holding it upright. Witnesses take the stand, one by one, each carrying their own version of the past. Some are confident. Others are visibly shaken, the act of speaking reopening spaces they worked hard to close. The court hears about the community, about routines, about how normal everything felt until it didn't. The ordinariness becomes unsettling. Evil, when it appears without spectacle, leaves deeper echoes. One witness, long dismissed in the early years, delivers testimony that lands with unexpected force. Their voice trembles, but the details hold. They speak of a sound that didn't belong. Of a moment that felt wrong before it made sense. The defense presses hard, pointing out inconsistencies, minor contradictions. The witness does not argue. They explain. Memory is not a recording, they say. It is a reconstruction. The jury listens. Expert testimony follows, clinical and precise. Behavioral patterns. Post-event conduct. The way certain choices correlate with knowledge not publicly available at the time. None of it proves guilt on its own. Together, it paints a picture that is difficult to ignore. The prosecution does not say this is what happened. They say this is what fits. The accused remains silent throughout. No testimony. No narrative offered to counter the one unfolding. This silence becomes its own presence in the room. The defense frames it as restraint, as respect for process. The prosecution allows the jury to interpret it however they will. Silence, after all, has always been central to this case. Outside the courtroom, the community fractures along familiar lines. Some feel vindicated, believing the arrest confirms what they suspected for years. Others remain unconvinced, uneasy with a case built on inference and time-worn evidence. Social media fills with arguments, amateur analysis, certainty without consequence. The killing becomes a public debate, its complexity flattened into opinion. The family watches everything with a distant ball of exhaustion. They have waited too long to expect clarity from a single proceeding. For them, the trial is not about proving a theory. It is about acknowledging loss. About having the story spoken aloud in a room where it cannot be dismissed or forgotten. They sit together, hands clasped, faces composed, carrying grief that no verdict can resolve. As the days pass, tension tightens. Each ruling on evidence feels monumental. Each objection sustained or overruled sends ripples through the room. The jury absorbs it all, tasked with making sense of a narrative that spans a decade, that demands both logic and intuition. They are reminded again and again that this is not about possibility, but about reasonable doubt. Closing arguments arrive with a weight that feels almost physical. The prosecution speaks of patience, of the long arc of accountability, of how truth does not always announce itself loudly. The defense returns to uncertainty, to the danger of filling gaps with belief, to the irreversible cost of being wrong. Both sides speak with conviction. Both sound plausible. This is the nature of justice at its most uncomfortable. The jury retreats to deliberate, carrying the case with them into a private space where speculation becomes decision. Hours pass. Then days. The waiting stretches nerves thin. The family tries not to read meaning into the length of deliberation. The detectives try not to replay testimony in their heads. Everyone understands that once the verdict is read, nothing will be the same again, regardless of what it says. When the jury returns, the room stills in a way that feels unnatural, as if sound itself is holding its breath. The foreperson stands. Words are read. Each one lands heavily, reshaping the narrative in real time. The reaction is muted. There is no eruption, no collapse. Just a quiet acknowledgement that a line has been crossed, that the case has reached a conclusion it was never guaranteed to reach. The verdict does not end the debate. It never does. Appeals are discussed almost immediately. Legal pathways extend forward, complex and uncertain. The story, now anchored by a judicial outcome, continues to ripple outward, interpreted and reinterpreted by those who were never in the room. For the family, there is no rush of closure. There is relief, yes, but it is subdued, tangled with sadness and a strange sense of dislocation. 10 years of waiting does not dissolve in a single moment. It lingers, reshaping their lives in quieter ways. For the detectives, the case finally loosens its grip. Not completely. It never will. But the weight shifts. The file is closed, at least formally. The work they carried home with them, that invaded sleep and followed them through ordinary days, recedes slightly. They know they did what they could with what they had. That knowledge is enough to let them breathe again. The community begins, slowly, to settle. The house at the center of it all becomes just a house again, though some will always walk past it a little faster, a little quieter. The killing is no longer an open wound, but a scar, visible if you know where to look. Time moves forward, indifferent to resolution. New stories replace old ones. Headlines fade. But beneath the surface, the case leaves a residue, a reminder that some truths take years to surface, and some never fully do. The story that once lived in silence has been spoken, challenged, judged. Whether justice has been done will be argued long after the courtroom empties. What cannot be argued is this: the waiting is over. And in the quiet that follows, a different question lingers, softer but no less haunting. Not what happened, but what it cost to finally find out.